I've rewritten this script so many times, to the point where I finished one and still wasn't happy with it. I've had such a hard time putting into words how I feel about this game, more so than the past two entries. I gave myself a break between this video and the one for Phantasy Star 2, despite marathoning the series when I played them, all because, as opposed to the past two games, I don't like this one. I thought it was decent my first time through, but after thinking about it and playing it some more, what little enjoyment I had slipped away bit by bit to the point where it's something I don't know if I'll ever come back to. And I hate reviewing games I genuinely don't find appealing because it's so unfulfilling. I want to talk about the positives. This channel is filled by passion, the good kind. In fact, the one time I did review a game that brought me next to no enjoyment, you can clearly hear it in my narration. Just looking at the gameplay from various entries, not only does it look like a lot of fun, but it gives me major Tales vibes. And if you know me, you know I love that series. Listen to this doofus. He doesn't want to be here, and neither do I. But even then, that was just a bad game. Phantasy Star 3 might not be worse, but it feels worse because it isn't just a bad game, it's a disappointing one. I loved the first two games, so I wanted to love this one, but I don't. Which I say to you in such an informal manner as opposed to the past two Phantasy Star videos because I don't want to review this game. I'm clickbaiting you guys. This is not a review, but a video essay. A video essay on why I think Phantasy Star 3 kinda sucks. I'm not going to be as detail-oriented as I usually am, but instead just hit the big points and get this game out of the way so we can finally dive into the fourth and final game in the original quadrilogy. I hope that's okay, because trying to write about this game like my other reviews was driving me crazy, so bear with me just this once, please. Thank you. With all that said, grab a snack and get in the spaceship if you want, because we're going to be talking about why Phantasy Star 3 is the worst of the series and an ambitious mess. But first, context. How did this game end up the way it is? Did the team behind the series lose their touch? Well, what if I told you the original team had next to nothing to do with this game? Let's take it back, because around the game's release date, April of 1990 in Japan and July of 1991 overseas, the legendary Sega vs. Nintendo battle was underway. And on top of the typical aim of making higher quality content, a big part of Sega's strategy was to make a special game in particular that would knock the big end off of the gaming throne, meaning all hands were on deck and nearly the entire team behind Phantasy Star 1 and 2 were a part of the group responsible for crafting the Mario Killer. Important figures in making the original two games so great, such as Rieko Kodama and the Video Game Insider Trader, now had their hands tied with an incredibly important Sega title. That's right, it's Alex Kidd. Yeah, it's Sonic. It had to be Sonic. This game rules, and was the key crucial element for toppling the opposition. Clearly, Sega had their priorities, and in this particular instance, Phantasy Star was not one of them. But that's not to say it was completely forgotten. After all, Sonic alone couldn't carry the Genesis. Well, at least, not yet. Of course this couldn't be the only Genesis game. Other titles were being developed and there was a demand for the continuation of the Phantasy Star saga. Given the fact that the team behind those games were busy with something else entirely, an almost completely new group needed to take the reins for this next installment. Almost completely, because we still had S2 on the board, the man responsible for Phantasy Star 2's character profiles, who would be put in the writer and director's seat this time around for the entire project. As for the rest of the team, it would be made up of the developers from Golden Axe of all games, a beat-em-up, aka not an RPG. On top of this, since the team was next to completely new, the story wouldn't be as tightly connected to previous entries as things had already been. Rather, it'd tell a side story that would still fit in the timeline, just not be necessary to get the whole Phantasy Star experience. Not to say that it's mandatory to play Phantasy Star 1 before 2, but I strongly believe it was intended for players to experience the series in chronological order, as you could start to see the bigger picture getting that much clearer as you went on. Phantasy Star 3 would be a contributor nevertheless, but not a requirement, be it due to the team not wanting to interfere with whatever plan was at play, or for the sake of creative freedom. I doubt that we'll ever really know, and I don't really care. The fact of the matter is that this game was made by an entirely different group, designed in a way that tries to replicate the feelings those past two games were able to convey without actually getting it, something that goes for both its gameplay and story. Again, Phantasy Star 3's contribution to the overarching narrative is fairly loose, with the next game only acknowledging this entry in a missable side event, which that right there was already something difficult to work with. If it's so unimportant to the story we've been building thus far to the point where I can confidently skip it, especially now that I am interested in the bigger picture after how the second game ended, then why should I care? Whatever we're doing in this game has nothing to do with anything, a sentiment I could have looked over if this standalone story was interesting, but it's not. so I can't. What is this story, you ask? Well, it's one that follows a man named Reese who goes on a quest to the neighboring rival kingdom after his bride-to-be was stolen at the altar. A simple goal, all things considered, which the game agrees with, because it'll only be a few hours until you rescue your special lady. However, this game is called Phantasy Star 3 Generations of Doom because at that point, you'll be given the choice on who you want to marry. From there, you'll be taking part in future generation stories that introduce new conflicts, all a part of a narrative that kinda, sorta connects, I guess, leading to one of 4 endings. The protagonist changing based on the character you decide to marry, branching paths leading to multiple endings, entirely new storylines to look forward to on subsequent playthroughs. Doesn't that all sound so cool? I thought so, and was excited to play this game primarily to see this in action. But of course, this is where the problems really start to show their face. Marriage in this game is a choice decided entirely by which design you like more because these characters, once again, have no character. In fact, the cast is even bigger than it was in Phantasy Star 2 to compensate for these multiple timelines and branching routes. Can we please make the roster good before we start to bloat it up? It can't be that hard to write meaningful dialogue, can it? Have someone comment on the weather or something, crack some kind of dumb joke, recommend the viewers check out my Patreon linked in the description. Anything, at least try. Whenever characters do talk, which is already rare enough, it's just expository nonsense devoid of any personality, in one ear and out the other. All of this comes off especially odd this time around, not just because it's the 3rd game in the series, but the director was the man behind the character profiles in Phantasy Star 2. Making a good cast was his role the last time, so why does it feel like they didn't even try here? I don't care who I marry, they mean nothing to me. I would have killed for a maidenless route. Let me just chill with my cyborgs and call it a day. And I do mean let me just chill, because this story was not fun to follow in the slightest. Just a bunch of go here, do this, talk to that person, fight what's his name, who I guess is important to the plot now. There was no build up to anything. Stuff just happened, and it was due to a lack of engaging dialogue or proper world building that I didn't give a crap about anything. There was a massive lore dump right near the end of the game on this world's entire backstory, completely missable by the way, and I guess that was kinda cool, but even then, it's so late in the story that I'm already well past checked out. I'm doing the things the game wants me to do because I'm going through the motions. My heart's not in it, and I kept asking myself why I wasn't moving on to the next game that's supposed to be the best one. I was originally gonna go for all 4 endings. After the second one, however, and getting partway to the other 2, I could feel my energy waning. I wasn't having fun, and the game's stories weren't as different as advertised. In fact, you go to the exact same locations even if it makes no sense within the context of whatever story you're going through. It's to the point where I ran into the same exact NPCs who said the same exact things, even if my current party should have no idea who they are. If these maps were designed with only one route in mind, then why make me go to all of them in each playthrough? The answer? To pad out the game, and once I realized that this was the case, I saved myself the time and turned off the Genesis, or PS3. I played this on the M2 collection on the Japanese PSN. I'm telling you, man, those experience multipliers are a hell of a time saver. The idea for multiple generations was incredibly ambitious, and it's a great concept. In execution, however, this simply rearranges content rather than adding any, and I don't think that was the idea. If it was, then I take it back. Multiple generations were a mistake. A mistake that not even the gameplay could save, because while it's not that bad, it's also not that good. Let's start with the dungeons. In Phantasy Star 2, the problem was that these were over-designed to the point of frustration. In Phantasy Star 3, the problem is now the exact opposite. Under-designed to the point of dullness. Every single dungeon is the same. One big room with different walkways that either lead to the object of story progression, treasure, or nothing whatsoever. There are no puzzles, set pieces, or unique layouts of any kind, and as a result, everything becomes so incredibly uninteresting. Points for not forcing my hand at using a guide, but I ended up using one anyway because these things were so lame. I just wanted to get them out of the way, and there was never anything to look forward to. I would enter a dungeon and just want to know the quickest way to move on while grabbing a chest or 2. I almost found myself missing the needless complexity of Phantasy Star 2 because out of both extremes, I honestly prefer that to this. There, I was so incredibly frustrated, but hey, you can't say I wasn't invested. Here, it felt like my brain was constantly deteriorating the more I'd advance into the game. Sorry for expecting something from these dungeons. It's not like the overworld had anything interesting going on. Where's the anything? Traveling in general has zero stimulation, no unique layouts, no eye-catching landmarks, nothing. Nothing! It's all one big blah, and that was so frustrating to play through. Seriously, why is everything so boring? Where's the creativity, the charm? Even if you didn't know the history behind this game, I wonder if it'd be so hard to piece together that this was made by the B team, or a group inexperienced with the genre. This ain't Phantasy Star, this is a generic by-the-numbers RPG. It's soulless, and if I'm being honest, a part of me kinda knew this was gonna be the case as soon as my first encounter. And we're back to the first person view, huh? Whoa. Oh well, at least now nothing's distracting me from these great enemy designs like Evil Moose, Green Circles, and Floating Face, all of which with their eyeball-busting 16-bit animations consisting of the flick of a finger and David Hasselhoffing pecs. Do I really need to tell you all that the Sega Genesis can do better than this? No? Great, let's move on. When you're finally done gawking at whatever the hell this is supposed to be, you'll take note of your options, auto-battling or choosing your actions manually, be it attacking, defending, magic, using an item, or running away. Easy enough, and the past games didn't have anything too wild or stand out either. How they made up for this, however, was with their difficulty. Both games were relentless, and coming out on top made me feel incredible, like I really earned that victory. Phantasy Star 3 is the easiest in the series. Not a problem in and of itself, but because of how simple combat is, this once again made things very mundane. You would not believe just how much I auto-battled in this game without any sort of strategy. Not like I needed one, so why bother? The only fight where I felt like I had to try was the very final battle, despite this game having a decent amount of bosses. At the very least, it has more than the previous entries, but they were so understated that they didn't even have a boss theme associated with them. At least in those past games, you actually felt like the few bosses there were special bouts worthy of your attention. Here, you'd be forgiven if you didn't even realize you were fighting a boss. God, this game just feels so empty. Can you see why I didn't like it? It's one thing for a game to be bad in a frustrating manner, but another entirely when it's bad in a way where you just can't bring yourself to care about it. And believe me, for as much as I tried, it's very hard to care about Phantasy Star 3. No wonder the series wants you to forget about it. The game doesn't feel like it lines up with the others in terms of polish. And while I could bring up the fact that the science fantasy scale is once again in favor of one side over the other, whine about how the soundtrack is lame, leading me to use external music and official remixes, or complain about the lacking sprite work, at the end of the day, why bother? You get it. And God help anyone watching this who's a fan of this game. I wouldn't dare try to take that away from you, by the way, and I hope you leave a comment in defense of it. I want to understand what people see in this. I encourage you to explain to me as to why Phantasy Star 3 is good, actually. You're probably not going to change my mind, just as I'm sure this video didn't change yours, but I'd love to get a conversation going, because for me, the creative, thematic blend that grabbed my attention in the first place, the tough as nails, ball-bustingly hard gameplay that kept me coming back, and the personal experience forged within it all that got me to love these games were all missing within this third installment. The substitutes didn't get it, and as a result, the next game made sure to take its sweet time coming out so that the ones who knew what's supposed to go into these titles were behind it. Great news to be sure, but it's gonna have a hell of a hard time watching out this gross, disgusting taste in my mouth we all so unfortunately refer to as disappointment.